What's one leadership belief you've completely changed your mind about?
I used to think that delivery had to be perfect. I used to think that you had to nail every word and to be able to own it, almost like you could say it perfectly with great delivery. And now what I've learned is that when you're human, when you are thinking about what you're saying rather than delivering from a script, that's where people begin to trust the most. And so being human in the moment, sounding human in the moment is probably the most crucial thing. It's not even as important as the message necessarily. It is that groundedness that's most important.
Hi, I'm Christy Honeycutt, your host of Inside the C-Suite, where execs get real about leadership, impact, and what truly drives high-stake decisions. Today's guest is Peter Novak, founder of Strictly Speaking Group, a Yale-trained storyteller, executive communication coach, and advocate for multilingual leaders and professionals who speak English as a second language. Before coaching Fortune 100 executives, Peter spent 7 years studying to become a Jesuit priest, an experience that shaped his belief that leadership isn't about authority or ambition, but about humility, discernment, and serving others. Today, Peter helps leaders embrace what makes them different, reminding us that your voice isn't something to fix, it's something to own. Let's jump in, shall we? Peter, I know that my introduction did not do you justice. I would love if you'd share with the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Thanks so much, Christy. I started doing this work about 12 years ago, actually. I was a professor for most of my life. I was in academia and realized I never thought that the things I was doing in theater would actually translate to anything outside of theater. And I was so wrong. Everything that I built my career around and as an academic actually translate into the real world of business. And so the things that we do essentially are three things. The first is helping to prepare executives for high stakes events, whether that's speaking to a town hall internally or 5,000 people in an audience at a conference or at a reveal of new products. That's one of the things we do. The second is workshops for teams and for leadership teams around how they can better communicate with each other and get the authenticity and influence that they really need to have to lead. And then the third thing is individual coaching and how I help leaders communicate more clearly around what their intentions are and the impact that they see the work having. Those three things are what we do now. The theater and presentation and production and performance are all inherently part of it.
And answered so well, just like a coach with a theater background. I love it. So anybody that's been on my show knows that I do a really brief intake just to kind of understand who's coming on the show and do a little bit of research because I am a bit of a geek. I'd love to start with your story because it really resonated with me. It moved my heart. You spent 7 years preparing to become a Jesuit priest before your career took a completely different direction. So I'm curious, how did those years shape the leader that you've become today?
Yes, it's amazing that it was from the age of 23 to 30, so really formative time in someone's life. In those 7 years, you make vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's a very serious way to live. But those 7 years gave me experiences that I would never have gotten just being on my own. And so it was those experiences that really shaped who I am today. And it's funny because in the Jesuits, they call them your first 2 years before you take vows, you're a novice. And they send you on what are called experiments. And those experiments range from public service to teaching. And so I was working with people with HIV, and then I was teaching high school English. And then I worked as a chaplain in a hospital. And then I worked in Tijuana, Mexico, smuggling medications from San Diego across the border back into the clinic that these nuns ran in town. And it was just a fascinating experience overall. And then finally, I came to, as a Jesuit, teaching university students and went on and did my doctorate after that and continued teaching in university life. And so as a Jesuit, the core is about becoming a person for others and really understanding it's not really a slogan. It became a really important discipline for how I thought about leadership. And so a lot of other facets came along with that, like how do you make a decision? And one of those was discernment. And the discernment process is not one where a leader makes a decision. Ultimately, it's in dialogue with the people who are most affected. And so those were the factors that I think led to the way I think about leadership. The Latin word for really thinking about what the right answer is and making that discernment process for others is called magis. And it means the more, the deeper impact, the fuller good. All of those things have importance when you're making a decision that involve other people. And so I think that stayed with me in every leadership decision that I've had and every role that I've had since.
It's definitely an interesting experience that you had. I'm sure a lot came out of that. How would organizations look different if leaders asked themselves that question more often about choosing not just what's right, but what serves the greater good, as you said?
Yeah, imagine if every business could say not only what's good for the business, but what's good for people, how that might change. And a lot of businesses making a difference in the world is something they do, making life better through a product, through a service, through whatever it is that they have. But oftentimes, I think they do that at the expense of others as well. And internally, of course, you all know that when you're working for a company and you have a culture that is very focused on people, that can also be weaponized against you in some ways. When there's a downturn or when the cuts have to be made, people say, I thought you cared about us. And it's a really interesting dynamic, right? What the sustainable business versus nurturing a community that makes a difference in the world. And so there's some inherent challenges, I think, in that structure overall. But I think businesses that focus on making a greater impact and serving the good in as many ways as possible, the greater good, would make the business so much stronger.
I agree. We're both coaches. And in my coaching, I often say leadership is less about titles and more about identity.
That's right.
Do you believe that leaders spend too much of their time trying to perform leadership instead of becoming leaders?
That really gets to the heart of a really interesting dynamic, which is the performance of leadership, right? The actual, whether or not they're performative. And I want to use that word because oftentimes some leaders are performative. They know that they have to say something a specific way or they have to perform it a specific way. And that just goes against everything that I coach. And I know you probably coach as well. We want people to be authentic. What does authenticity really mean? And how do we get to that authenticity? And oftentimes I hear leaders speaking in a way formally that doesn't sound like them. And what they've done is they've taken the sort of corporate messaging and try to say it the way it's written. And it just sounds so inhuman and sounds so foreign from the way that they are. And so a lot of the work that I do is, no, take the core of what it's trying to say and humanize it for us and make a connection with us. That's the way to be authentic and in the moment. You shouldn't sound different for the different audiences that you're speaking to. It should still sound like you in every instance that you're communicating.
I love that answer so much. The cost of changing who you are is so expensive. And I have to tell you, because your story about the accent stopped me, because we know, and I think I shared some stats with you when we hopped on, 68 million people in the United States speak another language other than English in their home. That's 22% of our population is multilingual in the United States. And we know that these groups, they're getting judgments in seconds, not minutes, on if they're credible, intelligent, trustworthy, right? And then unintentionally, I think that there is a little bit of injustice for this population too, because they're ranked usually lower on competence and leadership and higher ability, whether they are or not. And I know that's the basis of your work. That's your 1-2 punch. What are your thoughts around that? How can we help this population overcome that themselves? But also, what guidance do you have for organizations to be more open-minded about this population?
Oh my gosh. Okay. How much time do we have? This is such a complex issue, essentially. Usually I like to start my workshops by saying, if you speak 4 languages, you're quadrilingual. If you speak 3, you're trilingual. If you speak 2, you're bilingual. If you speak 1, you're from the US probably, right? Or you're from Canada, or you're from Australia or Great Britain, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. Those statistics are about the same. About 78% of people in all of those more monolingual countries only speak English. And we have to recognize that the people who are speaking multilingually are speaking from a non-native perspective perhaps in English, are far and away doing way more work than native speakers are in the moment. They also have different skill levels of being able to multitask in different ways and code switch between cultures and languages in the moment. So they're doing a lot more. And I think native speakers have to recognize first and foremost that they are doing so much more work in the moment than most native speakers are. That's one aspect to it. The other is there was a great study that was done at McGill University in Canada. And basically, the story goes something like this. Let's say you're in a town where you don't know. Your car has broken down and your battery is out of juice and you have to get to a shop to repair the car. So you ask someone where to go. You ask two people. And the first person is a person who sounds like you and they give you directions. The second person is someone who has a foreign, quote unquote, accent, someone who's different from yours. Who do you believe more? And the data says you tend to trust the person who sounds like you more than the person who doesn't sound like you. Unless, and here's the key, unless the person with the out-group accent speaks with confidence. And if they do that, then that decreases that trust gap that's happening. And so the question that I keep asking and that I teach about is, how do you actually speak with confidence? What are the actual things that native English speakers register as confidence? And when I ask that in a room, people say, well, it means you're speaking with authority. Well, no. What does that actually mean? It's a part of me for saying, what the heck does it mean to sound confident? And there was another great study that was done that said that people who have non-native English accents can improve their clarity of speech without changing their accent. So it's not about changing the accent. That's where I get to say it's not an accent, it's an identity. It carries so much of who you are, so don't change that. But there are ways to change clarity, and you can do that with things that are not about pronunciation. They're about how you deliver tone, emotion, how you stress specific words or not. They're all paralinguistic, extralinguistic things that have just as much meaning, even more than the words that are coming out of your mouth. And so if you can learn those, if you know what native English speakers are listening for in terms of confidence, then it opens up a whole new range for you to change quickly and easily and to adapt for what those expectations are.
You said something that really hit me at a heart center. So, because I'm guilty of it as well. I've gone to other countries and traveling, and there's a travel guide that I use in one specific country because he's an expat and he's a native English speaker and he's also bilingual in that country. So I feel more comfortable with him. But as you're telling that story, I put myself in that position. And his name, by the way, is Polly. Would I trust Polly over somebody local there? And the answer immediately is going to be yes. But I'm sitting here questioning myself, why do I feel that way? So as a community, if we're encountering these individuals that English is their second language, how can we hold space for that experience and be less judgmental?
Part of it is recognizing the work that they're doing in the moment. Part of it is also communication is a two-way street. We expect all the non-native English speakers to do all the work. We expect them to change, not ourselves. And so the flip side of what I do in workshops is not only to recognize and validate the extra work that non-native speakers and multilingual speakers are doing and the gifts that they're sharing with our teams, it's to also educate the native English speakers on how they can do a better job at speaking to global audiences and what that means. One of the things I always talk about, and this is really fun, is as a native speaker, do you know what a phrasal verb is?
No.
I know. Most of us who grew up speaking English as our first language have no clue. But I can tell you this, that most people who have learned English as a second or third or fourth language, they understand what a phrasal verb is. And this is what it is. A phrasal verb is a verb that adds another word to it and it changes the meaning of the original verb. So let me give you an example. The word take. If I say take, I can say, oh, take off, take on, take over, take up. So many different ways of saying the word take, but take off also has maybe 7 or 8 different meanings. For example, if I say the plane took off at noon, she took off her sweater or jumper if you're British. The doctor took me off that medication. Take off. I told him to take off, right, which means to get out of here.
Kick rocks.
Right, to kick rocks. All of those are terms that we use and we are oblivious to the different there's 5,000 or more of these in our daily use that we're using. And we assume that people know what they are and they have to work harder to understand the meaning of what we're saying if we're not clear. And so I do a whole series on what global English is and how to make global English part of your delivery so that it becomes clearer for everybody. And that's really for native speakers. And so I think we can do a lot more in educating the native speaker background, especially when they're addressing different audiences. And some of it is cultural intelligence, how different audiences might respond to you in what you're saying and how you structure things versus the actual words that you're using as well, and making sure that you're clear on your vocabulary and what you're saying.
I love such great guidance because communication is the key to everything we do, verbal and
It is.
nonverbal. Do you see any nonverbal communication cues with your theatrical background that helps in communicating?
I do. And even with our gestures, right? So for example, I say 1, 2, 3 with my hands like this instead of 1, 2, and 3, which a lot of Americans tend to do. Right? 1, 2, 3. The reason for that is because I speak American Sign Language. And in sign language, this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. This is W. And that's why I don't use that. So 1, 2, 3. But I always start by going my thumb first, this and this. And you'll see different cultures in different languages using different gestures for meaning, especially with numbers, with delineating specific areas. But yes, body language means a lot. And how we use body language and focus and eye contact and all of those elements that are nonverbal in a huge amount of ways.
I love that. And that's part of your workshop as well, I presume.
It's interesting. I focus mostly on vocal speech. I don't focus as much on nonverbals, but we're looking at building that out more because I think it's an integral component to how we communicate.
I just think the way of the future, it's going to be more important, especially with AI just flooding every industry there. Everything is copy, paste, regurgitated. Look, Chad is my boyfriend. I use chatbot. I love all of it for ideation and helping make it clear. But I am seeing a lot of leaders that are leveraging this type of tool as kind of their voice, which I think is a big mistake because in the age of AI and in the age of how quickly the future work is moving, we're craving connectivity more than ever. Right? I think we're getting it wrong in a lot of ways, but are you seeing that too? How people are trying to lean into AI? Is that hurting their authenticity? Are they leaning too much on the rhythms of the tools?
They are. And I think you're seeing a little bit of a backlash on it too right now. You're seeing, I recognize that construction. I recognize that, if you say things like, that's not a tool to do this, it's a this. And that's the kind of language that we're hearing. It's changing the way we communicate oftentimes. And unfortunately, it's not helping. One of the things that I like to do is the reverse. I like to take recordings of you speaking spontaneously, the way that you've written things before AI came into being, interviews where you're speaking off the cuff, all of those together, and then have AI generate sort of a voice print for who you are and what you do. It can be your tone. It's a really interesting way to help the AI actually feel more authentic to who you are and can be much better and much more central to helping you as a tool rather than doing it for you. Does that make sense? So that your authenticity really does come through in a way that makes sense.
So I've got a bit of a marketing background. So what you're talking, like that's what you would do as an employer brand. You would look at your tone of voice. And I think now more than ever,
Yes.
Yeah, now more than ever, when you think about hiring in the future of work and the fact that everyone's having to navigate what's real and what's not.
What's not.
Right. It's the what's not. And now we're asking candidates, we're wanting to know, what is their brand? What do they care about? So there's so much more importance on the individual that's going to go work for an organization, whether they're an employee or a CEO, of what is your brand, right? And the brand comes back to how are you communicating? How are you showing up? What energy are you bringing? So from a theatrical side of things, help us there because I've gotten up and spoken in front of a lot of people. I'm dyslexic, so I will put that out there to my audience. I struggle. I don't speak multiple languages, but I struggle in my brain. I see things backwards and I have to consciously flip it. And so when I speak to audiences, even when I speak on the podcast, I'll get tongue-tied sometimes. What's your guidance for people with that type of differences?
So everyone is unique and everyone uses technology in different ways when they're presenting. So let's say you're on a main stage. Sometimes there's something called a confidence monitor, right? So for executives, they will have the slide on one screen and their notes on another screen right next to it. But you can often tell because confidence monitors sit either on the edge of the stage or below the audience. And so you'll see their eyes looking down to grab what's next and to come back up and to do things. And it's interesting. I always say one of the best things you can do is memorize your first 60 seconds. Memorize the first 60 seconds of whatever it is that you're going to do, because that's where the nerves are the greatest. That's right when you get on stage. And so if you've done that several times, and I'll rehearse it 5, 6, 7, 10 times with an exec, their entrance, where they're standing, the lights are different when they're on. Try to recreate all of those things so that you don't get thrown off by something that happens first. So memorize those first 60 seconds and then know your transitions, because you know the story, you know the background, you know your material most of the time. It's the transitions that mess us up. And so if you know the transitions and if you know the logic of where you're going in the storytelling, and if you know what the logic from one point to the next is, that's why transitions are important, then all of a sudden you'll have so much more confidence because you know where you're going. You don't get stuck in the, oh my gosh, where am I? I have to turn around and look at the screen, or those moments of panic that might come. And so just know your flow. And once you know the flow, then everything comes from that. There are different strategies, of course, to do that for folks. Do you like bullet points? And you can actually use AI. One of the things I love to do is record yourself speaking whenever you're going to do a talk. Record the whole thing in Microsoft or Otter or whatever, Zoom, and get a transcript of it. And then read the transcript and you're like, oh, gee, that doesn't sound as good as I had hoped. Or, boy, that meaning wasn't clear at all. And then put it through AI and say, where did I fall down? Where are some clearer ways of saying this? And the AI can then help you in your own voice, because it's what you said first to start with. And so lots of opportunities for AI to help us without taking away our humanity and what makes us who we are.
Absolutely. It's so funny because you have an innate gift, Peter, of knowing the questions I'm going to ask you before I ask them.
It's funny. I didn't think of it that way.
I love guests like that, though, because it just flows. So what does executive presence actually mean to you?
The term executive presence is often coded as male, oftentimes. And so I don't like calling it executive presence. I like calling it leadership presence instead.
Yeah, I like that too.
I just think it's often so coded in many ways. And so for me, leadership presence is about being able to communicate your authentic self, but more importantly than that, allowing others to do the same, right? Giving them the space to flourish, to speak how they do, not some cookie cutter mold of what it's supposed to be. And believe me, I hear clients who get feedback saying that they don't have enough executive presence. And that kills me because it's not specific, it's not helpful, and it ultimately defeats the person's sense of confidence when they hear that. And so it's really a challenging thing to hear, challenging thing then to get around for somebody to help them develop their own leadership presence in a way that is not what the cookie cutter mold says or what other people say it needs to be.
What you just said is so incredibly beautiful, because I do have a lot of PR firms that reach out to the show. And it's funny because what I think some C-suite anticipate or hope that they'll get out of it is, I said the right things, I presented myself well, I have quote unquote executive presence, people are going to want to come talk to me. Where I care about on this show is their heart and their learning lessons, so we can learn from each other. But more importantly, I want them to be able to let their hair down and be authentic, because that's when I find the magic happens. You get those good nuggets, because to me, executive presence, and I agree with you, I like leadership presence better. Executive presence feels guarded. It feels inauthentic and guarded, right? So that's great. What about imposter syndrome? Because that comes up a lot, right? And so how much of this is actually imposter syndrome of somebody just trying to fit into leadership that they feel they should be fitting into?
Yeah, some of it is imposter phenomena. And I agree that it is there. And so what we do is we talk about what that really means and how to think about most of the time. And this is the statistic with imposter phenomena that I think is most interesting, is that it usually occurs with people who are highly successful, right? They've already achieved a certain level of success, but they feel that they are alone in the way that they have achieved that success, that it's not as authentic as somebody, or as good or vital or real as somebody else's success. The fact of the matter is most of the people in that room are probably thinking the same thing. And so it's a horrible thing to think about. And so we try to get to the kernel of what that really looks like for them, what that means. And I constantly stress with folks that you got here because of your skills. You didn't get here for any other reason. And that's what we're going to do together, is to make sure that you are confident in those skills, especially in communication when you're delivering. And so oftentimes I'll just teach them a structure, a way to communicate effectively and clearly that helps people buy in more quickly and more readily, or how to get buy-in from teams that might be skeptical. And so let's talk about a way and a way of structuring your message so that people have greater buy-in. All of those things are, like you said at the very beginning, all of it comes down to communication. All of it comes down to the way we communicate. Every human problem is a communication problem. And so once you start working on communication, things open up for you in a way that I don't think they do in other types of leadership.
I would agree. I would even go as far to say that using your blinker in traffic is good communication.
Oh my gosh, that is key for me. Sitting behind somebody and when the light turns, then they turn their blinker on or their turn signal on. That's when I want to scream.
It's crazy. Well, this has been such a fantastic interview and you bring so much sage wisdom, advice, everything to the show. And I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I've got a couple of fun things I'd like to do. It's kind of a lightning round and then we'll wrap up. But I'd like you to finish these sentences. Leadership is
being yourself and allowing others to be themselves as well.
I love it. You did fantastic on my lightning round. The best communicator you've ever met.
Best communicator I've ever met is Steve Prevet. He's the former president of the University of San Francisco. His delivery is clear. His intent is focused. His structures are sound. Everything about the way he communicates is intentional and human.
You're using all my favorite words today, intentional and human. What's one leadership belief you've completely changed your mind about?
I used to think that delivery had to be perfect. I used to think that you had to nail every word and to be able to own it, almost like you could say it perfectly with great delivery. And now what I've learned is that when you're human, when you are thinking about what you're saying rather than delivering from a script, that's where people begin to trust the most. And so being human in the moment, sounding human in the moment is probably the most crucial thing. It's not even as important as the message necessarily. It is that groundedness that's most important.
Peter, you're hitting all of my favorite words again. Grounded. All right, one last one for you here. The future belongs to leaders who
are open to the different ways that all of us communicate, allow for that difference to exist, and create the space for it to really inform decision-making in every aspect of the culture that you're building for the company.
I love that. And guys, culture is built one human at a time. It is not the water cooler conversation or after hours at the pub. So Peter, it has been such an immense honor to get to spend some time with you. Thank you so from my heart to yours, for sharing your wisdom with the audience. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to, and how can the audience get in touch with you if they want to improve their communication skills?
Sure. Our website is the best way to get in touch with us, the strictlyspeakinggroup.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn is a great way to do it. Peter Novak as well on LinkedIn. I've got a course on LinkedIn for non-native English speakers and one for native English speakers to support. So it augments everything that we've talked about today with many more specifics. I'm happy to share that with folks if they want to get in touch.
Yeah, we'll have to make sure we include that link. And Peter's being very, very humble. Aren't you ranked one of the top LinkedIn learning instructors?
I think the course itself has over 250,000 people with thousands of 5-star reviews. So the aggregate is 4.8 stars, which just blows me away. But I'm thrilled with what the course has been able to do and how it's been helpful for folks. And so happy to continue that work in a variety of ways with others.
Well, see, you're being very humble. That was a lot of really good stars. Thank you again. Guys, go like and follow this guy right here. And please subscribe to Inside the C-Suite and shoot me a line if you know somebody you want to hear from next. Peter, thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, Christy. Take care. Bye-bye.